Confusing the wards, the rookie doctor led the notary to the sick wealthy woman. And as soon as she overheard her husband's conversation with her mother-in-law, Marcus felt uncertain under the mocking gazes of the nurses. The hospital director had told him directly that two other young doctors had tried their hand just before him but had failed. One of his predecessors had reportedly even given up the profession when faced with the harsh realities of daily life. "We have a department for critically ill patients here, and this, you know, is a huge responsibility. If you make a mistake, you can't justify it by saying you just finished your residency. Is that clear?" asked Eric Andrews, the head of the department. "Of course, I'll do everything I can," Marcus could only mutter shyly. So far, no one among the staff had addressed him formally. To the orderlies, nurses, and doctors, he was simply Marcus. That was the norm in the hospital. How the head called you was how everyone else would. It was annoying, but not too important. What Marcus really feared was making a mistake. He was also unsettled by the fact that the hospital director held a bias against him. While the head of the department might have simply doubted his abilities but at least didn't criticize him publicly, Matthew Barrington openly made various remarks. "Who on earth sends such inexperienced newcomers to serious work, or how am I supposed to explain to patients that such a young, inexperienced doctor can help them?" The director made these ironic comments precisely when more people were gathered in the ward. He would glance at Marcus as if casually, and everyone understood he was talking about the newcomer. Marcus had no standing among his colleagues as it was, and the director's cutting remarks and the head's doubts about his professionalism only opened the door for sidelong glances and contemptuous smirks. "Megan, how are you today?" he asked anxiously, looking at the pale young brunette who was clearly not yet 30. The nurses were gossiping about this patient, saying she was very wealthy and had achieved everything herself. But everything had gone to waste, and now even her husband and mother-in-law visited her only to make sure she wouldn't last long. One of the orderlies overheard their conversation, in which they discussed how after Megan's death they would finally be able to live properly. "And she doesn't even have any kids. Who did she earn the money for? For those monsters?" That's how the staff talked about Megan. So Marcus was especially concerned for the patient. It is well known that if no one supports a seriously ill person and expects them to recover, it's hard to withstand the struggle with disease. Rarely are people so self-reliant that that alone motivates them. "Well, I suppose I'm not doing worse, Mr. Brooks." She seemed to be the only one who remembered his last name. She always addressed the doctor respectfully, making Marcus feel that Megan truly trusted him. This was a ray of light in the realm of irony and disrespect in which he currently found himself. "Well, the test results aren't bad. You have every chance of pulling through." The tall, slender blonde with brown eyes tried to smile kindly. In fact, the patient's condition hadn't improved during the treatment, but it hadn't worsened either, which could be considered a small victory. That is, if compared to those who are really critically ill. Megan smiled ironically. "Just don't try to comfort me, Mr. Brooks. Tell me how it is. I know perfectly well that I'm in the department for the critically ill. You know, I hide nothing. I think you're just feeling gloomy. After all, you are a young woman. And our nurses also said that you're successful and wealthy. Surely, you have a dream that inspires you, something worth living for. Why are you always sad?" the doctor asked. In general, such things weren't supposed to be said to patients. But Marcus felt that she was lacking, above all, human, sincere care. "Well, of course, I have a dream. You know, I've always wanted to be a mother of many children and to have a reliable husband. I seem to have earned a lot of money, but my dream isn't meant to come true," she sighed sadly. "Why not? You do have a husband. And you're still young. You'll have children. Why build such gloomy forecasts for yourself?" Marcus was surprised. "It's unlikely that I'll ever have children, given my health, much less many. And as for my husband, you know, I never complain, but you have such a nice open face that I trust you and will tell you everything as it is." Donald doesn't love me, nor does his mother. As soon as I weakened, they immediately showed their true colors. Megan truly appreciated that Marcus, unlike the other hospital staff, spoke to her as a human being. She intuitively felt that this young doctor genuinely wanted her to get better, and she felt compelled to share what was really bothering her. You know, I think if you're right and my husband and mother-in-law really don't love me, then it's even more reason to recover just to spite them. Their faces will be so surprised. Marcus suddenly winked at the patient, as if they were schoolchildren joking during recess. He feared that Megan might get angry, but she suddenly smiled and even blushed like a girl. You know, thank you. There might be some truth in that. Surviving against the odds and maybe finding a new dream, Megan said thoughtfully. It was clear that her mood had significantly improved from what seemed to be a simple, insignificant conversation. Well, if you really want to thank me, recover and live long and happily, Marcus smiled in response. I'll try, although I can't promise, Megan continued to smile as he left. She thought it was a good sign that there was someone who believed that everything could turn out well for her. Marcus stepped out of the ward and noticed Megan's husband and his mother in the corridor. They seemed unpleasant and fidgety, resembling some sly predatory creatures waiting for a fat morsel to fall their way. He didn't tell Megan that she was right about her relatives, but the entire hospital was already whispering that this couple sincerely hoped for a fatal outcome that wouldn't take long to arrive. How's my sister-in-law? Asked a heavy-set brunette with a purple streak in her hair. She was clearly trying to look younger. But even her naturally styled makeup couldn't hide the wrinkles that indicated she had spent most of her life angry and dissatisfied. You know, today the patient can't have visitors. We're conducting extensive tests. We can't stress Megan out. He decided that at least today he would allow her to rest from her annoying relatives. And she definitely won't die today? Maybe it's better to invite a notary than to conduct tests, suggested a tall, narrow-shouldered man with blonde hair. Marcus was taken aback by this lack of tact, and it must have shown on his face. Because Donald's mother said, "Don't think anything bad, my son loves his wife very much. Megan is just worried that all her hard-earned money will go to who knows whom. He's only fulfilling her wishes." But it's still too early to talk about fulfilling her wishes. After all, in the next 50 years, Megan certainly won't die. Marcus didn't have the right to make such predictions, but for some reason, he felt compelled to say it now. You know what? Don't you think too highly of yourself to make such statements? We're all mortal. Donald snapped. Exactly, we all are. By the way, you should see a doctor. You have a rather unhealthy complexion, Marcus shot back, saying something he had no right to as a doctor. He was supposed to remain detached, not take anything too personally. Those were the rules. And Marcus knew them. In theory. But in practice, he didn't always manage to adhere to them. Mom, I don't get it. Is he on her side? Donald protested. Calm down. Doctors don't care who survives and who dies. They're just tired, and they're paid very little here. Especially the young ones, the patient's mother reassured her husband. Marcus decided that this was clearly a serious case. He wouldn't explain anything to those two. They needed to be educated while they were still very young, and now it was clearly too late. He resolved to do everything he could to help Megan recover. That would be the best lesson for those two. There was no need to bury anyone prematurely, and it wasn't right to gawk at someone else's misfortune either. Marcus wanted to go to lunch, but remembered that he needed to visit another Megan, who was faring much worse than her namesake. At just 50, the second patient had almost withered away from illness and was already connected to a breathing machine. So, how are you feeling today? Marcus tried to speak neutrally so as not to express his true feelings. Of course, this patient knew she was doomed. She had very little time left to live, but still, he shouldn't exacerbate her anxiety with worry on his face. Thank you, doctor. The painkillers helped, she replied. Well, I'll come by again in the evening, and if you need anything, just let the nurse know. I'll come right away, Marcus realized it wasn't worth lingering there since it would only make the patient uncomfortable. And he left. Marcus had almost learned to read thoughts and scan emotions. He rarely made mistakes. So, he was soon to become a seasoned doctor. The main thing was to exercise caution and prudence, as one serious mistake could ruin his career. When Marcus stepped out, a nurse approached him with an urgent question. "Doctor, a notary has come to see Megan, but my shift is ending. It seems you have a good rapport with her. Could you escort him to the patient?" Yes, of course. Marcus walked toward the man in a strict gray suit, holding a folder of documents. "Hello. The nurse mentioned you have a good relationship with Megan, my client." The notary couldn't recall the patronymic or surname. "Indeed, I am her attending physician." Marcus thought that the unpleasant husband and mother-in-law had finally sent a notary to make her write a will. It never occurred to him that this lawyer had come for another Megan, who was actually dying. "Megan, I'm sorry, but you have a visitor." Marcus felt awkward before the patient, as he couldn't protect her from the hostile husband and mother-in-law, convinced that the notary had indeed come for her. "Oh, so Donald and his mother sent you? Well, I'm not planning to die. Get out of here." Megan was on edge. She went to get some water at the cooler and stealthily slipped past her mother-in-law and husband, who were discussing what to do with her estate after she was gone. Megan also heard that this kind young doctor was trying to protect her. So, she had no doubt that the notary was sent by her relatives. She was so terrified at the sight of this visitor, it was as if her own death had come to her. That's why she dismissed the notary without listening. He looked very threatening. "And you get out too? How could you do this?" "You were protecting me. I heard it myself." "Did Bridget Brown pay you?" Marcus had never seen the patient so agitated. He didn't understand what had upset her so much. Only when he left the room did he realize that he had told Megan she would be on the mend soon, as there were no complications, and then he brought in this notary. He hadn't even thought that the notary had come to draft a will. Marcus believed that a businesswoman, even in the hospital, always had a lot of paperwork, lawyers to deal with. To top it all off, Eric Andrews called him in and demanded an explanation. "What's going on? Did you deliberately try to drive a recovering patient to a nervous breakdown?" "No, of course not. Just the nurse said that the notary came to see Megan and asked me to escort him." Marcus faltered, already very uncomfortable with how things turned out, and the last thing he wanted was to upset the patients. "Just don't tell me you didn't understand that this notary came about a will to another patient, to Megan, who is connected to the machine. Everyone in the hospital knows she won't last long." The department head fumed. "Eric Andrews, I really had no idea it was about someone else," Marcus admitted honestly. "Didn't it occur to you to ask for a surname, huh? Did you check the notary's ID? Were you planning to lead everyone anywhere you please?" The chief was seriously agitated. "You're right, I checked nothing. I promise it won't happen again, and I will apologize to the patients," was all Marcus could say. There was no point in explaining what and why he thought the chief would not be softened anyway. He was just looking for a reason to pick on him. "Listen, Marcus, I'm issuing you a reprimand." Eric Andrews yelled and expelled him from the office. The reason for such a harsh punishment was that the department head had long inquired about this young doctor and realized that his potential competitor had come to work. Far too promising and talented this Marcus was. If left unchecked, in a couple of years, this doctor might replace him and become Eric Andrews himself. And he wouldn't want that, of course. They discussed this issue with the hospital director and decided they would not let this self-assured prodigy grow in their hospital. Let him realize himself somewhere else, as such upstarts are not needed in their clinic. The system is already well established. Paying patients put a lot into the pockets of the head and director, and with this Marcus, problems are bound to arise if he is promoted. Posing as a self-sacrificing doctor, he works not for money, not for fear, but conscientiously, and that's unlikely to change over the years. The couple decided that each of them would do everything possible to get Marcus dismissed from the hospital, and today an opportunity arose. In fact, Eric Andrews was well aware of which Megan the notary had come to see. He was supposed to escort him to the right room since he personally handled this patient. However, he couldn't miss such an opportunity. First, he asked Marcus to check on his patient today, citing business, and then asked the nurse to have this young doctor escort the notary. Everything worked out just as the department head had hoped. Problems should be dealt with preemptively, he believed, and he managed to issue the first reprimand. There was no point in waiting for the new guy to start causing problems. Meanwhile, Megan still believed that her husband and mother-in-law had sent the notary to her, and now she was sure that they were just waiting for her to die. She also remembered Marcus's confused face. At that moment, when she accused him of siding with her relatives, she realized she might have been mistaken. But no, she had heard Marcus defending her. It turns out, the department head did indeed often meet with her mother-in-law, discussing things in his office behind closed doors. These visits were usually early in the morning when all the patients were supposed to be asleep. Megan, suffering from insomnia, had seen several such meetings with her scheming relatives. She could have turned to Caroline, her only friend, for advice, but for some reason, Caroline hadn't found the time to visit the hospital even once. When Megan called her, she said, "Sorry, I'm so busy, I just can't find the time," and hinted that she finally had a fiancé and needed to organize her personal life. So, Caroline was no longer reliable either. But who could she turn to? Only when Megan fell ill did she realize that she almost had no friends left, no one she could trust. Just then, as if by a twist of fate, Marcus came in and began explaining that he had brought the notary by mistake and didn't mean to offend her. In fact, the lawyer had come to see another patient. "You know, forgive me too for my hysteria. I lashed out at you for no reason at all." "There was no reason to think badly of you," Megan apologized as well and pleaded, "Listen, Marcus, it's awkward for me to ask you, but it seems there's no one else." She told him about her doubts and how the medication she received during the shifts when the head of the department was on duty seemed not to help at all, and perhaps even made her feel worse. "Listen, this is a very serious accusation," Marcus frowned. "I'll pay you well," Megan pleaded. "It's not about the money. If they're giving you the wrong medication, that's a crime." "Yes, Eric Andrews is a difficult person, but I doubt he would do such a thing," Marcus hesitated. "Okay, consider it my paranoia, but please, just take a look at what they give me during that shift." "You're the only one I trust," Megan begged. "All right, I still feel guilty towards you, so I'll help. But don't get your hopes up, you're probably mistaken." Marcus felt uncomfortable supporting the patient in what almost seemed like slander against the head of the department, but she looked so desperate that it was easier to agree. Marcus saw that Megan was indeed being deceived by everyone around her. For instance, Caroline, her friend, had only visited the hospital once at the very beginning. To his surprise, the doctor had repeatedly seen her picking up Donald, Megan's husband. And their conversation went something like this. "So, how is that boar doing?" the tall, athletic blonde asked. "No matter what, she just won't die." The man replied discontentedly. "Well, baby, we just need to keep trying. Then we'll be swimming in money, and the current hassle with this frail woman will be forgotten like a bad dream. You're my knight." The deceitful faux friend cooed. "Yes, I know you're right. But if you hadn't asked me to marry this Megan, I never would have. She's so boring. Always working and never paying attention to me, just lecturing me. And now she's just dull as mold." Donald nestled against Caroline as if she were his mommy. Marcus nearly gagged. "If you don't love her, then don't live with her, and certainly don't claim her money without earning it yourself." "And what about your mom? Is she nagging my poor baby?" Caroline asked sweetly. "Very much so. Mom doesn't know that I'll marry you right after Megan dies. She thinks I'll dedicate my life to her," Donald complained indignantly. "All right, no need to argue with her now. And when it's all over, we won't hurt Mom, but we won't share too much with her either. Right, my dear? It's only fair since we're doing all the hard work," The blonde continued her chant and pressed Donald to her luxurious bust. Megan's husband just nodded. Then they talked about something else and kissed. Marcus himself didn't know why he was watching them, but he was sure a whole conspiracy was swirling against the patient, so although he didn't upset her by revealing that her friend, like her husband, had betrayed her, he still decided to help. That day, Marcus deliberately stayed late. He knew that today Eric Andrews would leave early as usual since he met with friends at a bar after work on Fridays. This was a tradition. And so it happened that day. At exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, the department head locked his office door and left. Marcus had a spare key because the head had often mandated the young doctor to do his work. Therefore, the duty nurse did not suspect anything when he entered another office. What, he dumped his work on you again and took off to drink? Yes, it's nothing serious, it's just the fate of young doctors, he replied and pretended that nothing unusual was happening to avoid raising suspicions. Ah, you're such a good guy, I wish I had a husband like you. Nurse Joanna often flirted with him, although Marcus had made it clear many times that he was not interested in settling down, at least for now. Joanna, I would make a bad husband, I'd just be stuck at work all the time, Marcus joked. The nurse realized she was barking up the wrong tree and continued reading some novel. Marcus quickly found the original prescription sheet in the office and gasped upon seeing it. Megan was not supposed to be taking these medications at all. He asked Joanna to make a photocopy and went home to think carefully about what to do next. The next morning, he decided that he simply had to report to the hospital director. Marcus saw no other way to remain a professional and decent person. Matthew Barrington, there's something I need to discuss. The prescription sheet for the patient is signed by you, but she's been given some medications by mistake that make it impossible for her to recover. The young doctor pretended it was just some annoying error, hoping the director would be embarrassed and fix everything. And where did you get this sheet from? Matthew Barrington frowned. Of course, he got a cut from the money that the rich patient's husband brought to the head of the department. After all, they weren't poisoning Megan, just giving her useless drugs. So there was no criminal act in his view. But the fact that the new guy was sticking his nose into not his business, he really didn't like that. Eric Andrews dropped it yesterday, Marcus lied. He couldn't say that the patient suspected a conspiracy. That would betray Megan. Who knows what these scoundrels were plotting? Well, don't meddle in what's none of your business, dear. We'll handle it ourselves without your help. And concerning you, a strict investigation will need to be conducted. You seem to be seeing too much lately, or is one reprimand not enough for you? Matthew Barrington even bulged his eyes out in indignation. Imagine that, some youngster comes along trying to cut off his money supply from paying patients. He dares to touch the sacred. That same day, Marcus was shown that one should not meddle in other people's pockets, even if they are being filled illegally. Everyone in the hospital learned that the young doctor had filled out medical forms incorrectly, full of mistakes. But I didn't fill these out, Marcus protested when Eric Andrews accused him of incompetence. Well, yes, but the handwriting is yours, the head blatantly lied, having orchestrated it all himself, and knew perfectly that Marcus was not at fault. Eric Andrews might not have been talented in medicine, but he was excellent at forging signatures. So you're keeping an eye on everyone here, but soon you'll ruin all the patients yourself. How about you head off to the countryside, huh? Maybe that will set your mind right, and you won't want to slander decent people anymore? Matthew Barrington would actually be thrilled to fire Marcus with such a record so he couldn't work as a doctor ever again. But there was no valid reason for such a decision. If they really charged the young doctor with something serious, there would be investigations at higher levels. Neither the director nor the head needed those inspections. Well, all right, I'm tired of working in your den of snakes anyway. I can't stand to watch you harm people and profit from them. Marcus finally told Megan that she was being given useless medications. He left his contact information in case he could help in some way and left. So, you suffered because of me? I'm so sorry, the patient learned about the transfer at the last moment. She didn't even have time to think if she could do anything to help the doctor or even herself. "It's okay, nothing will happen to me, I'm tough. You better take care of yourself and trust no one," Marcus said, and said goodbye. He comforted himself with the thought that he had found the strength to act honorably, although it seemed to have ended his budding career. The hospital director and head of the department breathed a sigh of relief. Marcus hadn't yet earned his wings, but was already behaving so boldly. And what if he had gotten on his feet and started setting his own rules? It was scary to think about. At this rate, it could even come to living on a salary. Marcus didn't expect a warm welcome in the remote village. But he also didn't deserve such grim, even hostile treatment. No wonder the locals trusted no one. They couldn't even get the authorities to build a road. Every year they were promised, but each new government embezzled the money and then fled abroad. Marcus had to endure a half-hour ride in a cart on a muddy, potholed road. He thought all his insides would come out, and he felt so sorry for the frail old horse. The poor thing tried to pull its cart, but it could no longer walk fast, and there was no strength left, and for all this, he had to pay a bunch of money. Indeed, that was a rather inhospitable welcome. He arrived when it was already getting dark. The orderly, who also doubled as a guard and cleaner, immediately complained about her meager salary. "Just so you know, no one here gives a bribe. You'll live on your salary. My name's Amanda." "Well, I didn't take bribes in the city either. Such a loser I am," Marcus introduced himself. "And what did you do then?" "Why were you sent to us?" the robust gray-haired woman of indeterminate age asked, giving him a piercing look. "It seems I interfered with someone being killed, but I don't really know," Marcus admitted honestly. "Well, okay, chop some wood, there are logs in the yard. Can you do it? If not, I can help, but not for free." Marcus was no longer surprised by this. He realized the local people were unfriendly and certainly not altruistic. "I can manage. I used to do all the work when I stayed at my grandma's village as a child," he assured Amanda. And that was the absolute truth. His parents sent him to his grandma every summer so they could live a little for themselves, as they said. Marcus didn't complain, though. His grandmother loved him and tried to protect him, but the boy himself wanted to help the only person he needed in this life. "Well then, see you tomorrow," Amanda smirked. She watched from a distance as the newcomer skillfully swung the axe and sighed, "Yes, he's handy," hoping to make some money off the city simpleton. A month passed. Although Marcus successfully managed his duties, the villagers continued to gossip that they had been sent a young, unprofessional doctor. "It's clear, no decent doctor would come here, they require good conditions," a local grumbled during a visit. "You know what, Oswald, if you can't say anything nice, better to keep quiet," Marcus snapped. He was tired of enduring these insinuations. "All right, don't be offended, I just blurted it out stupidly," the short man began to apologize. Marcus remained silent. He wrote a prescription and showed him out of the office. He felt very tired, not just physically, but also morally. It's hard to work when everyone suspects you and shows no particular gratitude. But what could he do about it? Today's appointments were all finished. Marcus was about to head back to the home assigned to him as the doctor when someone banged on the door so hard it seemed like there must be a fire. Marcus flung the door open to find Oswald standing there without warm clothes, having run over in just a shirt and trousers, and it was deep autumn. What happened? Marcus began to dress quickly even before hearing the answer. "My mom's heart stopped," Oswald croaked. Marcus rushed to help. Fortunately, Lucy Campbell's cabin was not far. He grabbed everything necessary. The pale woman lay on the floor. The doctor began performing CPR. At first, there was no response. Oswald howled, lamenting who his mother had left him for. He was the only one among the villagers living such a bleak life. His father had abandoned him in infancy, so besides his mother, he had no close people. "Stop howling, who does that help?" Marcus snapped at him, and he immediately fell silent. Marcus had almost lost hope, but he continued to work mechanically, not showing that there were almost no chances left. "Come on, Campbell, it's time to come back to this world, buddy. Can't leave your goofball alone," he softly urged, and suddenly felt a faint heartbeat. Within 10 minutes, the pale Campbell, as the locals would say, came back to life, and Marcus instantly went from being a failure to a hero. As it turned out, while he was performing CPR, nearly a third of the village had entered the cabin. They were greatly impressed that Lucy Campbell had already stopped breathing and had no detectable pulse, but then the doctor came and fixed everything. From that day on, life in the village became noticeably easier. The villagers turned from nasty scoundrels into quite kind and even pleasant people. The only exception was perhaps Martin from the outskirts, who could never stay sober and tormented everyone at home. Can you make a man out of Martin? It's really sad for his wife, she's pregnant, the residents lamented. No, that's not my area. If your Martin doesn't want to get treated, I can't force him, Marcus said. At the same time, Megan felt the noose tightening. The medications still weren't helping, and her husband and mother-in-law no longer hid that they were eagerly awaiting the sole and unique encounter with her inheritance. And the only thing standing in the way of their happiness was Megan herself. "So, your husband really bothers you?" Unreliable man. His eyes wander, and his mother is a real shrew. Orderly Catherine, who was sympathetic to Megan, always spoke her mind about what was happening. It was hard to disagree with her. "I wish I never had to see him. I don't know what to do," Megan confessed. "You should just run. There's nothing to think about when everyone is against you. There's no other way out. They even drove Marcus out for trying to stand up for you. They won't let you survive if you stay." Mark my words, Catherine looked around fearfully at the door, not wanting anyone to overhear such a conversation. But she felt sorry for the patient. Megan was still young, had worked hard, earned well, and certainly not so that she could leave everything to these vultures. "Maybe you're right. Can you help me?" Megan suddenly agreed. "Of course, but I'm going on vacation tomorrow, so today is my last day," said the orderly. "Well then, today it is." Megan suddenly realized that if she missed this chance, there might not be another. When evening came, she called a taxi under the cover of darkness with just one bag. Catherine said goodbye with tears in her eyes. "At least call me when everything works out, but there has to be justice in this life." "I will." "Thank you." As much as Catherine refused, Megan gave her some money she had managed to withdraw secretly with the help of another orderly. She had already sent a message to her only friend, Caroline, planning to stay with her for a while until she decided what to do next. Despite the preparations, Megan still felt uneasy, although she had gathered her strength and escaped the trap. Caroline couldn't let her down. They had been friends since childhood. When Megan made it in this world and became wealthy, she hadn't forgotten to help her friend. She had even gifted her an apartment back then and helped her get a job. So of course, the friend would not leave her in a difficult moment and would help her stand up to her husband and mother-in-law, recover her health, and secure her money. The fact that Caroline hadn't come to the hospital was simply because she didn't understand the situation was so serious. But once she knew, she would surely rush to help. "Stop here, I want to walk a bit, gather my thoughts," Megan asked the taxi driver to stop a few houses away from her destination. She wanted to walk through familiar places. Once she had an apartment in this neighborhood. Later, she had given it to her friend and moved up much higher. The streetlights weren't working. From a distance, she saw Caroline looking out the window, scanning the street. She hadn't noticed Megan yet. Understandably, she had said she would arrive by taxi. The friend was watching for the car, wanting to meet and help. Megan was about to wave and call out, but suddenly Donald appeared at the window. "Well, why is she taking so long? It seems like she left half an hour ago." "Donald, she'll get here when she gets here. Where can she go?" "Here's where the trap snaps shut. Go calm your mother down in the meantime. She's also scared that it will all fall through," Caroline said nonchalantly. And for some reason, she kissed her husband right on the lips. Megan stumbled in surprise, barely managing not to scream as she fell into a puddle next to the uneven path leading to the house in her beige coat. For some reason, she didn't feel like getting up. How could this be? So Caroline was against her too? What trap were they talking about? And how long had her friend been in a relationship with her husband? Megan cried silently. Then she got up and, as best as she could, cleaned off her coat. Fortunately, it was covered with a water-resistant coating, so no stain remained. I wish I could wash off the rest of the dirt. I considered friends and family just as successfully, she thought bitterly. It was dark. Megan didn't know what to do. Then she remembered Marcus, who had tried to help her at the expense of his career. She suddenly thought that she could still make it to the bus station. Marcus had said that the last bus leaves very late, when he was planning to leave after his shift. She was indeed lucky. The taxi got her to the bus station 15 minutes before the last departure. She had little cash left and didn't know if it would be enough to get from the bus station to the remote village by the sprawling road. But she had nowhere else to go. So there was only one way left: try to ask Marcus for help. Surely he wouldn't turn her away in such a situation, but on the bus, she felt weak. The effects of her incomplete treatment were showing. The head of the department and the director continued to stuff her with useless vitamins. It didn't get worse, but there were no improvements either. "Are you feeling unwell, dear? You look so pale," an elderly woman sitting next to her nudged her gently with her elbow. "Yes, I'm sick," Megan admitted. "Where are you headed?" asked the neighbor. "To Marcus, Mr. Brooks, the doctor," she said. "Oh, even people from the city come to him. He must be a good doctor. Our folks initially thought he was a bad specialist, but he changed everyone's minds after he cured Campbell." Magdalene Carey told Megan the whole story, which was already known throughout the district, and concluded with enthusiasm, "and he brought her back to life when everyone was preparing for her funeral." Megan didn't interrupt the chatty neighbor. And because of this, Magdalene warmed to her even more and even asked her grandson to give her a lift to the right house for free. "Just say you're his fiancée, or else rumors will start. It's already night," the grandmother advised. Megan hadn't thought about that. But according to her story, Marcus lived alone and had no family. The main thing was that he didn't refuse her, and what to say to whom was secondary. It was almost 1 a.m. when someone knocked on the door. Marcus was almost asleep, but decided that someone must need help, otherwise they wouldn't disturb him. He jumped up, quickly got dressed, and ran to open the door. Outside stood Megan. Her appearance was frightened and even pitiful. She was clearly cold. "Here, welcome the bride." Delivered as Grandma asked, in the best form, said a young man who helped her down from the cart. "All right, come in." Marcus felt uneasy. Why had she arrived so late, and even called herself his fiancée? Rumors were now inevitable. He wasn't planning on burdening himself with a relationship yet. But in any case, it wasn't wise to clarify details in front of the curious Frank, otherwise, by the next day, the whole village would be retelling this conversation with new details. So he simply invited Megan in. "I don't have a luxury suite here, but I'll feed you and give you some coffee now. I see you're cold. Once you warm up, you can tell me what happened." He tried to stay calm. There was no need to scare Megan further, but clearly, she hadn't come to this remote place at such an hour for a good reason. But memories tormented him. Megan looked too much like his fiancée with whom they were planning a wedding. Marcus had been foolish, not noticing the changes in her behavior when she suddenly grew cold and began to treat him with disdain. And the reason became clear just before the wedding. His fiancée announced that she had met a wealthy businessman and was leaving him for the man. "Sorry, Marcus, but he offers me ready-made happiness," Brenda had told him. "But the wedding is tomorrow, the guests are invited." "Why didn't you say earlier?" He couldn't believe such betrayal. "Well, that's how it happened." Albert delayed until the last moment, didn't propose anything concrete, and only spoke up when he realized it was all over. She brazenly stated, the woman he had planned to spend his life with. So Marcus learned that he had only been a backup option. Enough time had passed, but the pain in his heart had not fully subsided. And now Megan appeared, who so resembled Brenda. Was this some kind of karma? Would she also turn out to be a gold digger and a lover of rich princes and ready-made happiness? Marcus could no longer trust women, especially affluent ones. If the poor could behave so badly, what could be expected from those who had achieved something? He had no desire to get close. Yet, after hearing the former patient's story, he thought he couldn't just leave her in such a state. It just wasn't humane. Well then, I understand. There's a separate room here. You can stay here, and I'll treat you. We'll see how things go from there, he offered her. I'm sorry that everyone now thinks I'm your bride. It was Magdalene Carey who blurted it out, and everyone picked it up. Megan apologized. Well, maybe it's actually better that way. At least the local busybodies won't harass you with their attention. I'll survive, Marcus smiled. Since becoming popular as a local doctor, he had indeed felt an excess of female attention. He was seen as a very promising husband, so Megan's arrival might free him from all that. And so, several months passed. Spring was approaching. Megan had gotten used to village life and was recovering thanks to Marcus's efforts. She helped him with the household chores, cleaned the house, and behaved unobtrusively. So much so that Marcus even thought he would miss her when the patient left. Of course, he understood that he was starting to fall in love, so if Megan started a new life away from him, it would probably be for the best. But still, it was sad when he thought about parting. It turned out that Megan had a background in psychology, and she helped him see patients, providing them with moral support. People sincerely grew to love her. Many were already waiting for them to officially marry and start a family. Megan just blushed. She also felt affection for Marcus and knew he liked her, but could you really impose yourself on someone just because you liked them? Megan knew nothing about his past, but it was clear Marcus was very cautious with women, so she didn't want to share her feelings with someone who wasn't interested in relationships, especially serious ones, and Megan wasn't considering anyone else. So, the man she had considered her husband turned out to be a mere fellow traveler, an opportunist, a swindler who clung to her only because she had money. At the same time, Donald was doing everything possible to find his wife. He could not allow the resources to slip from his hands. In his imagination, everything had already ended most favorably. He solemnly buried his wife and started a new, happy life with Caroline. He threw some money at his mother to keep her quiet, but in reality, it was different. His mother and mistress were hammering him from both sides, as if he had hidden Megan. I don't know where she is. I've called everyone I know. Maybe she went to that doctor they exiled to the boondocks because of her, he once speculated. There, you can think when you want to. His mother decided that this idea might be quite likely, and Caroline agreed with her. They had become so in sync lately that sometimes Donald felt like the third wheel, but still convinced himself that both women were trying their best just for him. Meanwhile, in the village, April had arrived. The month was challenging. Marcus received Alice at the hospital, a woman expecting quadruplets. I don't know if I can help, and why didn't they take her to the city in advance? Really, she should be going to the capital now, and it's already too late. Marcus had no necessary equipment in the village hospital. Oh, how could she? Martin let her go to the city, sighed Amanda, who continued to work as an orderly, and explained that Martin was perpetually drunk, harassed his wife needlessly, and gave his mother no peace. Well, I'll do what I can, Marcus sighed. And he did. Unfortunately, of the 4 children, only 3 survived, and Alice did not survive childbirth. The doctor understood that even this result was a miracle under the circumstances, but the villagers turned against him. They claimed he should have performed the impossible, saved everyone. How could he explain to them that from an alcoholic and his regularly beaten wife, under such conditions, it was simply impossible for all to be born and survive? The births, moreover, were premature, and the mother herself was in poor health. You killed my Alice. Martin, as usual, got drunk and started to pretend to be a grieving good husband. Surprisingly, many locals sided with him and also considered Marcus almost a murderer. What are you talking about? Alice was constantly beaten and lived in stress. It's surprising that nearly all the children survived. Megan tried to defend the young doctor. Well, of course, you would defend him. You're planning to marry him after all. As for me, I'm going to sue your lover. Don't expect any mercy, Martin continued to threaten. The story made it into the local newspapers. There, journalists posted a touching photo of a local drunk crying over his wife's grave. No one wrote that he had done everything to send his wife to her grave. And it turned out that the doctor was to blame for everything. Donald and his mother got hold of this article through Caroline, who had promptly gathered information about Marcus. I found out everything. Megan really is living with him. It seems we can get rid of her accomplice for a small fee. I found out from the editorial office that Megan wants to adopt all 3 kids, apparently to save her boyfriend. What do you mean? She has a man now? She should have been in her grave long ago, Donald exclaimed. Son, you're saying it wrong. Olga might think you still have feelings for Megan. She will be offended, his mother whispered, pulling him into another room. I hear everything, Bridget Brown. No, I'm not worried about that. But the fact that Megan might inherit these children, that worries me a lot because if something happens to her, the money won't come to us, Caroline snapped. Donald and his mother hadn't thought of that. They looked admiringly at her, who had outsmarted them in thinking several steps ahead. And in unison, mouths agape, they asked, So what do we do now? At that very moment, Megan was indeed putting all her energy into adopting the boys. It wasn't just that she wanted to secure her future in case her health deteriorated and leave her estate to these little ones, it was her chance to have a big family. Megan was sure that fate hadn't just thrown her into this remote village. And she felt obligated to help the newborns, who had lost their mother. As for the father, he could only drink and assert his rights, and he had no intention of caring for his sons. He continued to blame Marcus for negligence, but fewer and fewer residents supported him. People clearly saw that with such a father, the children wouldn't survive, and Marcus had been a good doctor. So almost everyone eventually signed a collective letter in his defense, which was sent to the local prosecutor's office. A thorough medical investigation was conducted, and in the end, Marcus was officially exonerated, to almost everyone's relief. Mr. Brooks, as you know, we performed exhumations of the bodies, and you performed a miracle. I'm not sure that even with the right equipment we could have saved the 3 babies. Why don't you come work with us at the regional hospital? Your talent is just wasting away in this backwater, one of the committee members said to him, congratulating him on his complete exoneration. You're giving me too much credit, Marcus was embarrassed. But various luminaries from the committee agreed with their colleague's opinion, and now he was awaited not only in the regional hospital but also in a private clinic in the city. He had become a celebrity unexpectedly. See, there wouldn't be happiness if misfortune hadn't helped. And I managed to invite the commission, deprive Martin of his parental rights. It wasn't difficult, as usual, he was drunk, began to chase them with a knife. Megan recounted her successes. Do you really want to be a mother to these boys? Marcus was surprised. He thought Megan just wanted to save them from their dangerous father and then send them to an orphanage. Of course, and why not? I have enough money. You yourself said I have another 50 years ahead of me. Remember, I said I dreamed of being a mother, Megan smiled. Marcus, of course, had played back all their conversations in his head many times and decided that now was the time to offer to be a father to the children. I was thinking, you've been my fiancé for a long time, why don't I become the father to these children? Marcus, forgive the silly question, but do you love me or are you just offering help out of pity? Megan blushed. Of course, I love you. Otherwise, why would I, in my right mind, agree to suddenly become a father to many children? Only for you would I consider it, Marcus also blushed. Well, let's then wait for my divorce. And if you change your mind by that time, I'll understand. Megan thought it might be wise to establish something like a probationary period. What if Marcus had proposed under the influence of emotions? I've actually thought about it long enough. Marcus was a bit upset that she saw him as frivolous, someone who might change his mind. But then he remembered that there was a lot to arrange for the wedding, especially since they would immediately have a large family. He decided not to argue, but to get to work. This time, his wedding did indeed take place. The divorce was obtained fairly quickly, and just a few months later, the villagers celebrated the noisy wedding of Marcus and Megan, joking that God really loves the Trinity, since he sent these children new parents to replace a good-for-nothing father and a deceased mother. As for Caroline, she finally figured out how to get the money. She decided that taking anything from a healthy Megan, who had seen through her, would be impossible. So, she wheedled her way into a business trip where a couple of single wealthy men were present. And it didn't matter that she only managed to charm a 70-year-old. A bank account, ailments, and gray hair, wonderful combinations. Who needs long-living, wealthy, and healthy husbands anyway? Donald and his mother agreed that all modern women were no good. Megan had not wished to die in time and leave all the money to worthy people, plus she adopted 3 paupers. Wasn't she crazy? And Caroline seemed like a sensible lady, but in the end, she ran off to some wealthy old man. Donald hoped that at least, as a decent woman, she would secretly support him and his mother. But that flirtatious woman had forgotten about him. Caroline truly loved money, and on that basis, considered herself a monogamist. As for Donald, who had become a dead end, she had forgotten him completely. And what were he and his mother to do now? Live out their days in a 2-bedroom apartment? Don't worry, son. Next time I will choose your bride myself, Donald's mother tried to soothe him. She had been unsuccessfully doing this for a very long time until she realized that her son would spend his whole life living off her. Donald hadn't found a job, while his mother had to work. What choice did she have? And she really disliked that her son was now waiting for her death, dreaming of selling the apartment and moving to a warmer climate. As for Megan and Marcus, they continued to live in love and harmony. The doctor was right. The disease had miraculously receded. And a few years later, the brothers also had a little